Madison Reynolds vanished 8 months ago, but what her husband Tyler uncovered before she disappeared exposed a shocking trail of betrayal, exploitation, and crime that stretched far beyond a simple affair. She didn't just cheat, she became a central figure in a hidden content ring that used vacation rentals, secret cameras, and fake identities. When the truth surfaced, Madison ran. Now, with victims still seeking justice and investigators still searching, the question remains: was she a pawn in someone else's game, or the mastermind who orchestrated it all? Madison Reynolds had always been the type of woman who craved adventure, even in the smallest things. She loved surprises, spontaneous trips, and Instagram-worthy moments that made her suburban life in Illinois seem a little more exciting than it really was. Her husband, Tyler, was the complete opposite. Quiet, steady, and loyal to a fault, Tyler loved routine. He worked in real estate, handling local listings and spending his evenings watching sports or managing the backyard. Together they looked like a happy couple, normal, dependable, and unremarkable in the best way. But what lay beneath the surface was far more complicated than anyone could guess. Their 6th wedding anniversary was coming up, and while Tyler suggested a quiet weekend getaway to a nearby lake cabin, Madison had other plans. She told him she wanted to go on a girls' trip, just her and a few close friends, to Miami for 5 days. Sun, beach, laughter, she said. Something different for once. Tyler didn't love the idea, but didn't want to be controlling either. He trusted Madison, always had. So he agreed without pushing back, helping her book flights and handing over a credit card just in case. When she left, she kissed him on the cheek, told him to keep the dog fed, and walked out the door with a pink suitcase and a smile. That would be the last normal moment Tyler would remember for a long time. At first, everything seemed fine. Madison sent pictures, group selfies on the beach, tropical drinks, hotel views. Her texts were normal, a little too normal, if Tyler had been paying closer attention. But he was busy with work, and there was nothing glaring to make him worry. That changed 3 days into the trip when he received a call from his bank's fraud department. A luxury car rental had been charged to their joint card, followed by several high-end purchases, designer clothes, champagne, and late-night food delivery. The total bill had crossed over $1,000 in just 2 days. The bank flagged it due to unusual spending behavior. Tyler tried to rationalize it. Maybe Madison had lost her card and was using the joint one in a pinch. Maybe her friends convinced her to splurge. Still, something felt off. He called her immediately, but it went to voicemail. He texted, asking about the charges. She replied 4 hours later, saying everything was fine and that her phone had died during a boat party. That explanation didn't sit right with Tyler. Later that night, unable to sleep, Tyler logged into their shared laptop. He checked the location history linked to Madison's Google account. To his surprise, she hadn't checked into the hotel she'd told him about. Her phone had been active in a completely different part of the city, in a neighborhood known for high-end rentals and influencer parties. Curious, Tyler looked up the Airbnb listings in that area and found one that matched the background from Madison's Instagram stories. She hadn't even tried to disguise it. The balcony view, the plants, the interior furniture, it all matched. It was then that Tyler's concern turned into suspicion. He clicked through her social media and found that she hadn't tagged any of her friends. In fact, none of them had posted anything from the trip. He scrolled further and came across a photo posted by a random nightclub's account. It was dimly lit and chaotic, but there she was, Madison, clearly visible in the background, wrapped around a man's arm, laughing with a drink in her hand. She wasn't wearing her wedding ring. Tyler stared at the image for several minutes. He downloaded it, zoomed in, and saved it to a new folder on the desktop. Then he did something he'd never imagined himself doing. He made a fake Instagram account and began following people tagged in the nightclub post. One by one, he found more photos, some of Madison, some of the men, different men. Each one appeared in different posts at different venues. The same man never repeated. The timeline aligned with her entire trip. He felt sick. Numb, still, he said nothing when Madison returned home the following day. She came back tan, smiling, and chatty. She hugged him, unpacked her suitcase, and tossed her laundry into the washer as if nothing had happened. Tyler sat at the kitchen table and watched her. She didn't notice the tension. Or maybe she didn't care. Instead of confronting her immediately, Tyler continued his quiet investigation. Over the next few days, he collected data, screenshots, purchase records, phone location logs, and more social media posts. His obsession grew. He created a timeline of events, matching photos to timestamps and purchases. He noticed a pattern. Madison had been with 8 different men over the course of 5 days. He didn't know their names, only their online handles and appearances. Most of them were physically fit, confident, flashy. None of them looked like him. Tyler kept asking himself if this was just a wild fling or something worse. Was she being manipulated? Was she in danger? Or had she simply decided to live a double life for a week and left her marriage behind like an old pair of shoes? He reached a breaking point when he revisited the Airbnb listing and realized it had a hidden security camera above the entryway. It didn't show inside the apartment, but it showed every person who walked through that front door. Tyler took a screenshot of the exterior cam and contacted the host through a burner account, claiming he had forgotten something at the rental and needed assistance reviewing the camera footage. The host refused, citing privacy, but Tyler had already learned enough. Still clinging to the belief that something darker might be at play, Tyler went to the police. He presented his file, not as a betrayed husband, but as a concerned spouse worried about exploitation or coercion. The police took down the details, intrigued more by the trafficking angle than the cheating. They promised to look into it, and Tyler left with a copy of the incident report. That night he couldn't sleep. Madison lay beside him, breathing softly, unaware of the storm gathering around her. Tyler stared at the ceiling, his mind spinning with images he couldn't erase. The life they had built, 6 years of memories, laughter, and trust, felt like a stranger's dream. He didn't know what the police would find. He didn't even know what he wanted anymore, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever was hiding behind Madison's smile wasn't just betrayal. It was a gateway into something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The days after Tyler submitted the report to the police passed in a strange haze. He went through the motions, answering client emails, mowing the lawn, even attending a neighborhood cookout with Madison by his side. But everything felt unreal, like he was watching his life from the outside. He knew things would eventually collapse, but he didn't know when or how hard. Madison acted as though everything was normal, humming in the kitchen, making plans for fall decorations, and even suggesting they adopt a second dog. Tyler nodded along, smiled when he had to, and waited for the cracks to widen. While the police began a preliminary review of his claim, Tyler kept digging. The burner social media account he had created continued to feed him clues. With a few well-placed friend requests and a convincing profile, he gained access to multiple private stories and tagged photos. The men Madison had met weren't locals. They were influencers, personal trainers, models, some barely above the radar, others with massive online followings. Each seemed to move in the same social circles, attending parties and brand launches in Miami, often showing off designer clothes, rented cars, and expensive watches. Tyler cataloged every new piece of content, creating a disturbing mosaic of a week he hadn't lived through but now knew better than any of his own. The 8th man, in particular, caught his attention. Unlike the others, this man didn't seem interested in publicity. His account had few posts, almost no personal photos, and dozens of cryptic captions. One image showed him standing outside the same Airbnb Madison had stayed in, wearing dark sunglasses and staring directly into the camera. The timestamp matched the last night of Madison's trip. Tyler shivered as he stared at the screen. Then came the call. A detective named Alvarez reached out, confirming that they had reviewed the basic facts of Tyler's report and were moving forward. It wasn't a full-blown criminal case yet, but something about the mention of multiple unidentified men, a secluded Airbnb, and flagged credit card activity had raised eyebrows. Tyler was asked to provide everything he had: screenshots, videos, usernames, receipts, even Madison's phone backup if he had it. He handed it over without hesitation. Within a week, authorities contacted the Airbnb host and issued a formal request for footage from the external security cameras. Though the footage didn't capture what occurred inside the property, it showed clearly who entered and exited. One by one, the men Madison had met appeared on the grainy footage. each arriving in different vehicles at all hours of the day and night. Madison met them at the door, smiling, dressed up, sometimes even barefoot. The image repeated again and again until a new face appeared. This man didn't match any of the others. He wore a plain hoodie, never looked at the camera, and carried a small black pouch. He entered the unit shortly after midnight on the 5th night of the trip and didn't leave for over 3 hours. When he finally exited, he appeared alone. Madison didn't walk him out. His license plate wasn't visible, and facial recognition returned no matches. That made the authorities uneasy. They decided to send a small team to the property. Though new guests were already staying there, the unit had remained mostly untouched. With the host's consent, detectives searched the apartment thoroughly. They found nothing obviously illegal, no drugs, no weapons, no signs of violence. But they did discover something odd. In the cabinet under the kitchen sink, there was a strip of adhesive residue in the shape of a square about the size of the pouch seen in the footage. Whatever had been placed there was now gone. That discovery changed the tone of the investigation. Detectives began treating the case as a potential criminal matter. They contacted local Miami PD for support and began tracing the online presence of every man who had visited the unit. Background checks were launched. One had been arrested 2 years earlier for illegal possession of recording equipment. Another was tied to a cryptocurrency scam. Most disturbing of all was the man in the hoodie who, according to a separate investigation, might be connected to a trafficking ring that used rental properties as temporary grooming sites. While authorities chased leads, Tyler continued watching from the sidelines. His nights were sleepless, his days filled with anxiety. Every time Madison entered the room, he studied her face, looking for some sign of guilt, fear, or shame. But she gave him nothing. She laughed at TV shows, took long showers, and spent hours scrolling on her phone. It was as if the trip had never happened. Eventually, Madison was brought in for questioning not as a suspect, but as a potential witness or victim. She was interviewed under calm, non-accusatory terms. When asked about her trip, she claimed it had been uneventful. Just a few friends, late nights, and some drinks. When confronted with the Airbnb footage, she said the men were acquaintances she met at the beach and that they came over to hang out. Nothing more. When asked about the black pouch, she denied seeing it. Her tone remained flat throughout. The detectives weren't sure whether she was lying or simply unaware of the full picture. But their concerns grew when forensic swabs of the apartment turned up traces of MDMA and ketamine drugs commonly used in both party scenes and illicit recording setups. Madison had been at the center of something larger than she realized, and possibly more dangerous than she was willing to admit. Back home, the silence between Tyler and Madison deepened. He now knew the trip hadn't just been infidelity. It had become part of a broader criminal web, one that might include unconsented recordings, trafficking, and blackmail. But he still couldn't figure out Madison's role. Was she a victim? A willing participant? Or something in between? A week later, detectives contacted Tyler again. The case had been escalated to a multi-agency task force, and they wanted him to stay quiet while they completed surveillance on the suspects. They also asked him to keep an eye on Madison to monitor her behavior, look for encrypted apps, or any attempts to destroy evidence. Tyler agreed. But something inside him was changing. He had begun as a heartbroken husband trying to understand his wife's betrayal. Now he was part of an active investigation. His trust was gone. His grief had been replaced by curiosity and something darker. He wanted the truth, no matter how ugly. No matter how much it destroyed what little was left of their marriage. As he lay in bed beside Madison, pretending to sleep, he listened to the faint clicks of her phone screen. She was messaging someone. And Tyler was more certain than ever this wasn't over. It was just beginning. The more Tyler watched his wife, the less he recognized her. Madison moved through their house like a stranger now, performing the routine of a wife while something distant flickered behind her eyes. She cooked, folded laundry, laughed at the television. But Tyler could see the disconnect in her gaze, the way her fingers lingered just a little too long on her phone, the way she flinched if he came too close when she didn't expect it. It was as if she knew a storm was coming but didn't know when it would hit. The investigators had warned him not to confront her. They wanted the surveillance to continue. There was a possibility she was still communicating with the men from Miami, possibly unaware that some of them were under active investigation. Tyler had agreed, although the temptation to scream, accuse, or demand the truth threatened to explode inside him daily. Instead, he kept his face blank, his tone neutral, and installed software on her devices under the guidance of law enforcement. Every text, every call, every deleted photo was copied and sent to a secure folder. That's how he discovered the hidden app. Disguised as a weather widget, it was actually an encrypted chat platform. She used it late at night, usually in the bathroom with the fan running, sometimes in the laundry room. The messages were short, sometimes just photos, sometimes brief bursts of coded phrases. Most of the usernames were just numbers or emojis. One in particular appeared frequently, an owl icon with no name, always sending links and addresses. Investigators flagged the account, and what they uncovered pulled the case into darker territory. The owl account was tied to an online operation known for creating hidden camera content. It wasn't porn in the conventional sense, it was surveillance footage captured in private residences, often rented Airbnb properties. The videos were distributed on encrypted servers for paying clients. The operation was suspected of trafficking, extortion, and possibly even drugging women without their knowledge. Madison's name showed up in a few financial log small transfers, disguised as shopping payments. The time frame matched her Miami trip. While the evidence mounted, Madison remained unaware. Or perhaps she was in denial. Tyler watched her scroll through her phone, now knowing that she may have been both a victim and an accomplice. It was possible that she had been manipulated. But the chat logs suggested more than passive involvement. She had initiated conversations, arranged times, and in one message, mentioned splitting payment for editing rights. That line froze Tyler's blood. Investigators obtained a court order to seize Madison's devices, but instead of going straight to her, they devised a plan. She would be invited to a routine follow-up about her initial police report. There, in a controlled environment, her phone would be accessed and cloned. Tyler was instructed not to react, not to interfere. His job was simply to ensure she went to the meeting. The day of the appointment, Madison seemed anxious but masked it with overcompensation. She wore makeup, a fresh blouse, and sprayed her perfume twice, something she rarely did. Tyler offered to drive her, but she refused. She left with a smile and a "see you later," but her eyes didn't meet his. At the station, detectives took her into a private room and asked basic follow-up questions. As she answered, another officer cloned her phone in another room. They retrieved not just messages, but cloud backups, voice memos, and hidden folders. One folder, disguised as a recipe collection, contained short video clips from inside the Airbnb. They were low resolution, poorly lit, but disturbing. Madison appeared in several, often unaware of the camera, sometimes looking directly into it. She was seen engaging with the men in ways that made her appear complicit, but always under conditions that raised concern about consent. In one clip, a man adjusted the angle of a hidden camera, clearly aware of what he was capturing. Even more unsettling were the audio recordings. In one, two men were heard arguing about who gets the files first and whether she signed anything, another recording captured. Madison laughing nervously as one man talked about uploading clips for clients overseas. The evidence was damning. Madison was either deeply involved in a content ring or had been groomed so thoroughly that she no longer understood the scope of her situation. Back at home, Tyler received a call. The detectives informed him they were moving forward with a broader criminal investigation and would likely arrest at least 3 of the men involved within the week. They also warned him that Madison could face charges possibly for conspiracy, possibly as a material witness, depending on how the next few days unfolded. Tyler thanked them, then sat in his office for nearly an hour, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of what his life had become. That night, Madison came home quieter than usual. She claimed the meeting had been boring and that she was tired. She went to bed early, leaving Tyler alone in the living room with his thoughts. He opened the secure folder sent by the investigators and watched one of the video clips. Madison smiled in it. She looked happy, not scared, not confused, just happy. He felt his stomach twist into a knot. The next morning, he found her standing in the garage, staring at her car. She said it wouldn't start. Tyler offered to help, and as he opened the hood, he noticed something odd. Her trunk was packed. A suitcase, toiletries, even her passport. When he asked her why, she shrugged and said, "Just organizing. I might go visit my sister next weekend," but Tyler knew better. She was planning to run. He called the lead investigator that evening. Within hours, surveillance was increased and the green light for arrests was moved up. The task force was ready to close the net. The final piece fell into place when investigators traced Madison's financial activity to a private subscription site hosted on an encrypted platform. Her email had been used to verify uploads. IP addresses matched those from the Airbnb. Payments were small but consistent, $200 here, $350 there every few weeks since her return from Miami, and always tied to new video content. It was no longer just about infidelity. Madison had crossed a legal line. Whether she understood the gravity of her actions or not, the evidence showed she had participated in monetizing recordings, some of which featured her, others that did not. That meant she had access to footage of other women. She wasn't just a subject, she was a gatekeeper. The case had expanded far beyond Tyler's initial fears. What started as a suspicion of cheating had led to the uncovering of a broader criminal enterprise. The woman he had loved for years, the one he trusted enough to send on a solo vacation, had become entangled in something sinister, something that couldn't be undone. And now, justice was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty. The arrest came quickly and without warning. In the early hours of a Thursday morning, while most of the neighborhood was still asleep, unmarked vehicles rolled through the city. In 3 separate operations, agents executed warrants against the men identified from the Miami trip. 2 were taken into custody without incident, both still living in high-rise apartments funded by online content revenue. The 3rd tried to flee. He had been tipped off days earlier and had packed a bag, withdrawn cash, and changed SIM cards, but it wasn't enough. He was tracked through a mobile hotspot and intercepted at a bus terminal just minutes before boarding a Greyhound. By the time Madison woke up that morning, the news was already on the local channels. Multiple arrests tied to illicit content ring operating through vacation rentals, the headlines read. The suspects' mugshots were blurred, but the story began to circulate online. Forums lit up with speculation. A few screenshots surfaced low-res thumbnails of rooms that matched the Airbnb she had stayed in. No names were released yet, but Tyler knew it was only a matter of time. Madison didn't mention the news. She went about her day as if the world hadn't shifted beneath her. She poured cereal, watered the houseplants, and took a long shower while music echoed off the bathroom walls. But Tyler noticed her tension, the small twitches in her hands. The way she checked her phone every few minutes, frowning silently at the screen, she knew something was happening. She just didn't know how close it was to swallowing her whole. Later that evening, detectives called Tyler with an update. The suspects were being held and interrogated. One of them had started talking fast. He admitted that hidden cameras had been installed in multiple Airbnb properties, most of them wired to transmit data remotely. Some women had known. Some hadn't. When asked about Madison, he claimed she was one of the few who had been okay with it. He said she was eager, even helpful. She had shown the others how to pose. She had handled payments. She had offered ideas. The confession came with a flash drive 1, the suspect handed over in hopes of leniency. On it were hours of footage, metadata files, and messages. The folder labeled Murray caught their attention. Dozens of clips were dated during the time Madison had stayed in Miami. Not all featured her, but her voice was present in many. She could be heard giving instructions. "Use that angle," she said in one. "No faces," she said in another. In one clip, she was laughing as a man adjusted a tripod disguised as a lamp. With that, Madison's role became undeniable. She wasn't just involved. She had helped produce the content. Her prints were on the cameras. Her name was linked to the accounts. Her voice was on the files. Tyler received the news with a strange sense of detachment. Shock had long since passed. All that remained was cold clarity. The woman he had loved, defended, and suspected, she wasn't just guilty of cheating. She had facilitated a crime. The detectives told Tyler they would be issuing a warrant for Madison's arrest within 48 hours. They asked if he could help keep her calm and unaware until then. Tyler agreed. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. The next day, Tyler played his part. He made coffee, pretended to laugh at her small talk, even offered to take her out for dinner. Madison seemed wary but went along with it. She was quieter now, less confident, as if sensing the air around her was thinning. She barely touched her food and excused herself halfway through the meal to make a call outside. Tyler watched her from the window, her silhouette framed by the fading sun, her voice low and urgent. She was trying to reach someone, perhaps the man with the owl icon, perhaps someone else in the loop, but it was too late. The net was already closing. That night she didn't sleep. Tyler heard her pacing in the hallway, opening and closing drawers, whispering into her phone again. At one point, she stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching him. He closed his eyes and pretended to breathe deeply. She stayed there for several minutes before retreating to the guest room. In the morning, she was gone. Her car was missing. Her phone had been left behind, wiped clean. The suitcase was gone, along with her passport and a few $1,000s in cash that Tyler hadn't even realized were missing. He called the lead detective immediately. Within an hour, a bolo was issued. Surveillance footage from a gas station 2 hours south showed her wearing a hoodie, sunglasses, and carrying a duffel bag. She had paid in cash, no electronic trail. She had clearly planned the escape in advance. What no one knew was where she was heading or who was helping her. Days turned into a week. The story finally broke on national news. Madison S.'s name was released as a person of interest in an ongoing investigation involving unauthorized content creation and digital trafficking. Her face was on every screen. Old high school acquaintances began sharing her graduation photos. Former co-workers from the clinic posted cryptic statuses. People speculated wildly, was she coerced? Was she running from something worse? The online community was divided. Some painted her as a naive woman caught in a manipulative scheme. Others labeled her a predator. Tyler didn't join in either narrative. He had seen too much to believe she was innocent. But he also knew she wasn't the mastermind. She was something in between, a willing participant in a system designed to exploit. A week and a half after her disappearance, her car was found abandoned in a parking garage in Georgia. There were no fingerprints inside, no signs of struggle. Security footage showed her walking away with a man whose face was never visible. Police believe she had changed her appearance and boarded a bus or rideshare, but that was the last trace of her. As the investigation continued without her, the men arrested began facing preliminary hearings. The charges ranged from conspiracy to distribute illicit content to wire fraud and criminal invasion of privacy. One was charged with trafficking-related offenses. Prosecutors began building a larger case, using the content, the financial trails, and the digital fingerprints. Madison remained missing. Tyler filed for divorce, quietly, without ceremony. The house felt like a shell. Everything reminded him of her photos, furniture, even the dog that waited by the door. He deleted her number, boxed up her belongings, and tried to rebuild a version of life that didn't include questions without answers. But late at night, he still checked the news. He searched for updates, anonymous sightings, cryptic Reddit threads. Sometimes he thought he saw her in crowds or passing cars. It never was. He didn't know if she would ever return. All he knew was that the woman he loved had vanished long before the getaway. Her body had stayed behind. But everything else, the trust, the truth, the version of her he once believed in, was already gone. Months passed, but the story didn't fade. It evolved, twisted, resurfaced. Madison Reynolds remained a fugitive. Her photo was circulated in airports, bus stations, and border patrol centers. Investigators believe she had likely fled the country under a false identity. There were whispers she had contacts in the Caribbean, possibly through one of the men she had collaborated with during the Miami trip. Others speculated she had disappeared into underground circles where cash ruled and identities were fluid. But no matter how far she had gone, the damage left behind continued to spread. Back in Illinois, Tyler tried to resume a life that barely resembled the one he'd known. The investigation had quieted down publicly, but in the background it was still active. Court cases against the 3 arrested men moved slowly through the system, complicated by layers of digital evidence, international money trails, and uncooperative witnesses. The footage they had collected was horrifying in scope: dozens of victims, hundreds of hours of unauthorized recordings, and clear signs that the operation had existed long before Madison's involvement. And likely it would continue unless every piece of the network was exposed. Tyler was subpoenaed to testify, not as a criminal witness, but as someone who had uncovered the initial breadcrumbs. The prosecutor called him the reluctant whistleblower, a title Tyler hated but accepted. He sat through depositions, answered difficult questions, and handed over every last file he'd collected in those first terrifying weeks. When they played a short clip in court, his wife's voice, coaching someone behind a camera, he felt like his ribs had collapsed inward. He didn't cry. He just sat there and let the truth speak for itself. As the trials dragged on, the narrative around Madison began to change. The media initially labeled her as a victim-turned-accomplice, but as more footage and messages were uncovered, that framing began to fracture. Madison hadn't been manipulated in the way many assumed. She had planned her actions, she had profited, and she had vanished before she could answer for any of it. Public opinion began to tilt. Headlines now called her the vanishing wife, the woman behind the lens, and in one particularly brutal article, America's most normal-looking predator. Tyler ignored most of it. He stopped watching the news altogether. Instead, he poured himself into work. Real estate was slow, but he took every listing he could. He sold fixer-uppers, handled probate properties, even mowed lawns to stay distracted. Anything to keep his mind away from the image of Madison laughing in those videos, or the silence that followed her disappearance. Then came the call he wasn't expecting. A woman had been detained in Belize during a routine ID check. She matched Madison's height, hair color, and eye shape, but was traveling under a different name and using foreign documents. The fingerprints were smudged deliberately, but local authorities flagged her for secondary screening. The American consulate was contacted. Investigators flew in within hours. They confirmed it wasn't Madison. Another false alarm. Still, the event reignited the case in the media, and once again, Tyler found himself fielding questions from reporters and friends he hadn't spoken to in years. He started receiving letters. Handwritten notes from strangers who had seen the documentary, watched the news segments, or followed the Reddit threads. Some offered sympathy. Others offered judgment. A few asked if he thought Madison had planned her escape months in advance, maybe even before the Miami trip. One letter came from a woman in Ohio who claimed to have seen Madison on a Greyhound bus headed west. No timestamp, no photo. Just a vague memory and the words, "She looked like she wanted to disappear." Eventually, Tyler changed his number. But in the stillness of his home, when the windows rattled from distant traffic and the lights buzzed with electricity, he couldn't help but revisit it all in his mind. The perfect life that never was. The wife who had left behind more questions than answers. The possibility that she was still watching from a new identity, a hidden profile, a ghost account that let her track the fallout from a distance. One evening, nearly 8 months after her disappearance, Tyler received a notification from a secure folder he had almost forgotten. It was linked to one of Madison's old devices. Since years ago, someone had accessed it. A single file had been added, no name, no metadata, just a blurry, low-resolution photo. It showed a beach, pale sand, and a woman walking away from the camera. The angle was distant, the image grainy, but the posture was unmistakable. Madison, her hair was shorter. She wore sunglasses and a plain tank top. In her hand, she held what looked like a burner phone. There was no message, no explanation. Just the photo, uploaded from an IP address that traced back to Panama. Tyler stared at the image for hours. He forwarded it to the investigators. They began working on a new lead, though they warned him not to get his hopes up. It could be another decoy, another breadcrumb laid out to distract. But deep down, Tyler believed it was real. Madison had sent it. For what reason he didn't know. Guilt? Taunting? A farewell? The case remained open. Her name remained on federal watch lists, but as time stretched forward, the urgency dimmed. Other crimes took priority. Other faces replaced hers on the headlines. For the system, Madison Reynolds became a ghost, another shadow in a digital age of vanishing identities and blurred morality. But for Tyler, she never vanished completely. Sometimes in the early morning, he would wake up and imagine she was beside him again. The warmth of her skin, the smell of her hair, the illusion of a life that never truly existed. And then, like mist burned away by sunlight, the memory would fade, leaving behind only cold sheets and silence. He never remarried. He sold the house and moved to a quieter place, away from the city, away from the past. Some wounds, he realized, don't heal. They don't even close. They just become part of the body, aching when the weather changes, throbbing in the quiet. And somewhere out there, he knew, Madison still walked the earth. Not a victim, not just a villain, but a puzzle no one had fully solved, and maybe never would.